Do you guys believe that the heaviest sumo fighter weighs almost 300 kilos? What world's toughest sumo fighters are capable of? How and why sumo fighters are so big and bulky? And what are the positive aspects of their lives? Generally, sumo is a lot more interesting kind of sport than most people think. And the most interesting thing about sumo is, of course, the wrestlers themselves. When we talk about sumo, we always imagine a huge, round Japanese wrestler wearing mawashi belt. The guy with giant arms, massive legs, and huge belly, like this guy. Modern day wrestlers really do look like this. But did you know that this has not always been the case? Until 20th century, sumo wrestlers were much thinner, and they had more muscles. They were more shredded, sort of. They looked about the same as some of the professional boxers or MMA fighters we know today. By the way, even in our time there are sumo wrestlers who look much smaller than the majority. Now there's this Czech guy, Pavel Boyar, also known under his professional moniker Takoyama Shintaro. With a height of 185 centimeters and weight of 90 to 100 kilograms, he was one of the lightest sumo wrestlers in the modern era. But why most sumo wrestlers are so enormous? Why can't they be like Pavel and not be so fat? The fact of the matter is that there are no weight categories in professional sumo. Therefore, many wrestlers try to gain as much weight as possible. Almost all popular sumo wrestlers weigh over 120 kilograms. Otherwise, they don't have much chance to win. Because as you can imagine, wrestling with a 150 kilo dude weighing 80 or 90 is very difficult. It's very unlikely that you will ever win. That's why sumo wrestlers try to be as big as they possibly can. That's why they gain weight, and they actually have several methods they use, so let's talk about some of them right now. On average, sumo wrestlers weigh from 120 to 130 kilos, although there are some exceptions and some fighters weigh under 200 or even over 200 kilos. But we'll talk about them later. Anyway, almost all sumo wrestlers gain weight by aid of special diets and special daily regime. Sumo wrestlers need to follow a strict daily routine to gain weight. They wake up very early in the day. Immediately after they take a shower, sumo wrestlers need to start training. Before they eat, they usually train from 4 to 6 hours. Wrestlers must absorb in the process completely, so it's quite a long workout. So when do they gain mass? After a workout, wrestlers typically take a hot bath and then a meal. On the one hand, the thing about sumo diet is a bit like eat as much as you can. There are no restrictions most of the time. The more calories, the better. They can even drink alcohol. It is considered to be absolutely normal. On the other hand, professional sumo wrestlers sometimes do follow a certain diet. Most athletes try to consume about 20,000 calories, and they usually eat twice a day. To gain weight, many sumo wrestlers eat a soup they call chankonabe. It's a kind of dish made of various ingredients. It usually contains chicken, fish, tofu, and veggies. Chankonabe is very high in protein. It is usually served with beer and rice to make it more fatty. Wrestlers go to bed immediately after they eat. They usually need to rest a little because they have lots of training to do. Many of them sleep in oxygen masks which help them breathe after a heavy meal. After sleeping, sumo wrestlers do their second workout, after which they eat again and go to bed. The next day, the process repeats. This mode allows them to put on huge amounts of weight, and that allows them to fight savagely. Obviously, all of this has a downside. This kind of diet is not normal and pretty bad for one's system, especially because wrestlers are allowed to drink alcohol. Their life expectancy isn't very high, about 10 years shorter than that of an average Japanese, but many of them are willing to make that sacrifice. Now let's talk about their powers and what they can do. Obviously, large mass means great power. Sumo wrestlers have no problems with this. These obese guys are strong by default, but strength comes not only from their weight, but also from the training process. It may seem to many that sumo wrestlers only eat and fight, but this is not entirely true. A constant top regime, a wild routine that repeats every day and doesn't change, a strict hierarchy in the training camp, an insane diet, all of this makes sumo wrestlers extremely powerful athletes. They have very impressive bodies. Some fighters' biceps and triceps are enormous. Sometimes those are the size of a normal person's leg. Even brown bears can envy their strength. Well, thanks to the wild routine and tough regime, sumo wrestlers are very tempered. Their fights usually last only about a few seconds. During this short period of time, wrestlers should demonstrate their skills. A large sumo wrestler can withstand a clash with a giant like himself at a speed of 50 to 60 kilometers per hour. This is where the fight begins. This fact in itself is quite impressive because an unprepared person will probably get damaged pretty badly after such a blow. Also, sumo wrestlers know how to hook and throw a 150 kilogram opponent or push them out of the circle. Things like that typically require incredible power. Don't forget that in just 10 seconds of a duel, sumo wrestlers are capable of changing their tactics several times. And yet, in most cases, it's the size that matters. The bigger the athlete, the better. Some sumo wrestlers accept this and eat until they get incredibly massive. Some of them succeed and they become champions and leave their mark in history. The toughest sumo wrestlers in history is Aurora Satoshi, also known as Aurora. You'd probably assume that he's Japanese, but nope. The toughest sumo wrestler of all time is a guy from Russia. His name's Anatoly Mikhailov. In his prime in 2018, Aurora weighed almost 293 kilos. Just imagine how huge he is. Anatoly held the title of the largest active sumo heavyweight for a couple of years. In 2017, he became the toughest sumo fighter in the world. In 2018, when his weight was at its peak, he confirmed this title. And even though he retired, he is still the hardest sumo wrestler of all time. As for the toughest Japanese, it is still Yamamoto Ryuta, weighing 277. He was the heaviest Japanese sumo wrestler and arguably the heaviest Japanese in all the history. Like Anatoly, Yamamoto is retired. But while Aurora did it voluntarily, in case of Ryuta, it was the Japanese Sumo Association who forced him to leave, all because he was caught in fixed fight. Well, the place between the two of these big guys belonged to American Saliwa Fauli from Hawaii. He's ranked second in the list of the toughest sumo wrestlers in the world. In his prime, he weighed 285 kilos. Konisiki's style is not exactly sophisticated, but his technique is quite reliable and extremely effective. They don't call this guy Meat Bomb for no reason. Negative side of sumo. Huge size and fierce strength is all very cool, of course, but there are negative sides to a typical life of a sumo wrestler. Now, we already have talked about life expectancy, which is 10 years lower on average. Another unpleasant thing for sumo wrestler is that they are not allowed driving cars, not only because of their status, but also because their huge bellies don't let them operate the wheel properly. Sumo wrestlers are also limited in many other ways. Generally, the more successful they are, the more things they can get. The kinds of clothes and shoes they wear depend on the level they reach. There are also many restrictions regarding smartphones and internet usage. Household chores also depend on the status of the fighter. Junior wrestlers get up before everyone else. They clean up and cook and do these kinds of things. They also serve the elders. They say that this way of life creates a kind of incentive. But it doesn't have to be all that bad, does it? Hard training, crazy pace, restrictions, all of this should be rewarded, right? And they get their reward. A good sumo wrestler's salary is pretty high, typically. The top wrestlers can expect monthly salaries ranging from $30,000 to $60,000. And this is not even mentioning the sponsorship payments provided after competitions. Besides, we should not forget that sumo is a very popular form of martial arts in Japan. In the land of the rising sun, sumo wrestlers are much respected and loved. Some of them even include communication with fans as a kind of daily routine. And even though fighters suffer in a lot of ways, All of this gets compensated by the fact that they get lots of money and popularity. Thank you for watching, guys. Tell us if you want to be a sumo fighter. Also, if you like the content, subscribe for more, and we'll see you another time.